Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this event, which was made possible through the Brock University Charter Agreement. It's a partnership and collaboration between the Environmental Sustainability Research Center and Facilities Management, and it's focused on advancing and communicating campus sustainability. I want to thank both Ryan and Scott, who have led this agreement with the support of senior administrators, including Dean Mackis and Brian Hutchings, both of who sent their regrets. We do want to let you know that we will be live streaming this event and taking audience questions from within the room, but also virtually. So if I have my hand up, it's because there's an online question. Before we officially begin, I want to acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples and other nations. I'm going to begin by introducing each of our panelists, and then I'm also going to introduce our moderator, Marilyne Jollineau, and then Marilyne will come up and talk to you about the event and how it's going to be carried out today. So our moderator for the panel discussion today is Dr. Marilyne Jollineau. Marilyne is an associate professor in the Department of Geography and Tourism Studies and is also the graduate program director of the Sustainability Science and Society Master's Program within the ESRC. She specializes in geospatial technologies and remote sensing. Marilyne's research area focuses on water resource and management, mapping and monitoring wetland ecosystems, and sustainable agricultural land use practices. Today we've paired our panelists together, and Marilyne will explain a little bit about the groupings as we go through, but I wanted you to know we paired them together based on their academic and work histories. So the first pair I'm going to introduce is Jessica Blythe and Kerry Beattie, who are both, if you just want to raise your hands as I talk about you. Dr. Blythe joined us at Brock in September 2018 as an assistant professor in Environmental Sustainability Research Center. Jessica's research engages in issues related to resilience, climate change adaptation, and transformation, where she explores the ways that environmental change interacts with other global processes to exacerbate inequality, increase vulnerability, and undermine social ecological sustainability. Jessica aims to contribute to innovative research that translates into real-world sustainability solutions. Kerry Beattie is the Chief Strategic Communications and Public Affairs Officer at the Town of Lincoln, who is one of our partners with the ESRC. She works alongside senior management team to provide strategic communications counsel to the Chief Administrative Officer and to Council. Kerry is also responsible for delivering communications activities such as strategic partnerships, media relations, digital communications, issues management, risk and crisis communications, internal communications, public engagement, and branding. We have Jessica and Kerry paired together today as they can both speak to the importance of communication and knowledge mobilization in their respective sectors. Our next pair is Dr. Julia Baird and Natalie Green. Dr. Julia Baird is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Tourism Studies and the Environmental Sustainability Research Center. She's also the Canadian Research Chair in Human Dimensions of Water Resources and Water Resilience. Julia's research focuses on how we can foster resilience of freshwater resources through management and governance in an era of rapid change and uncertainty. The scale of her research ranges from the individual to small groups to provincial, national, and international efforts. Natalie Green completed her Master of Science in Biology at Laurentian University, where her research focused on the efforts of contaminants on fish behavior. Natalie led the remediation efforts in several large educational campaigns in the Detroit River area of concern for 6 years, and she currently works at the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority as a project manager for the Niagara River Remedial Action Plan. She is responsible for the implementation and facilitation of activities which aim to improve the Niagara River. Julia and Natalie were paired together as they both work with water and capacity of water management and sustainability. And our final pair are Mary Quintana and Ellen Savoya here at the end. Mary holds a bachelor's degree in electronics and communications engineering, a master's in telecommunications management, and completed a second master's in environment and sustainability at Western University in 2010. She began as an environmental project coordinator at Western and worked her way up to the position of energy and carbon manager over 8 years, and she now works as the director of asset management and utilities here at Brock University. She is also a certified energy manager and a certified measurement and verification professional by the Association of Energy Engineers and LED Green Associate Certification. And Ellen Savoya is the Senior Manager of Environmental Services with the Niagara Parks Commission, another partnership of the ASRC, a self-sustaining agency of the province of Ontario, whose mission is the preservation of the natural and cultural heritage of the Niagara River corridor. A professional planner, Ellen Savoya has worked over 28 years to create the sustainable cities and parkland. Ellen has a background in landscape architecture as well as environmental studies, and leads a small but mighty team of dedicated staff that have made significant progress supporting Niagara Parks' environmental mandate. Ellen and Mary have been paired together because they can both speak on their extraordinary career advancements in the field. Marilyne, can I bring you up?
Absolutely.
Start? Perfect.
Thank you, Amanda.
No problem.
It's my absolute pleasure to be here today, and I wish you all a wonderful International Women's Day. This is a first for us, and I want to first thank Amanda Smits, because she really has been actively pursuing this event and managed to bring us all together today. So I applaud you. Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here. My job here today is to explain basically what's the purpose of this event and how we can expect it to unfold today. So first, I want to explain that this is meant to be interactive and a learning opportunity for all of us, that everybody in the room has a voice here today, that we are not representing obviously all voices on the panel, but that we've made an attempt to put together a group that has been actively engaged in environmental sustainability in terms of their careers. And it's also a group that is somewhat familiar with each other, right? So for the most part, we've all worked together because to really, I think, have an engaged, interactive conversation today, it's very helpful to know each other a little bit. And so we're actually going to ask you soon to introduce yourself to each other, and you've already done that. I noticed you came in and you started chatting amongst yourselves, but we would very much like you to take time to talk to each other, and I will invite you to do that throughout this session. So we're here today mostly because it's International Women's Day. The theme of the year really is about, or the day, but for this year is about balance for better. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but I find it quite fascinating that, of course, in environmental sustainability, we're always trying to achieve some kind of balance in the environment, and that this kind of balance is a really nice, sort of comfortable place. It's a healthy place. If we think about, balanced diet, if we think about balance just in our lives in terms of our work-life balance, it's really important. So it's an interesting theme for me. This year, they also the theme focuses on, as it has in the past, gender equality, discrimination awareness, and celebrating achievements of women. So we identified some themes that we want to think about today: unity, celebration, reflection, advocacy, and action. And that we hope the discussion today will reflect all of that, and that some of that will resonate with you at some point. So how will this actually work? We have introductory questions for the panel, and then we're going to have the audience interact with those questions. Then we'll have specific questions for the pairings that we have here today, and then we'll open up questions or comments from the audience. And then lastly, we'll have closing questions should time permit, so we can have a longer discussion. And then, of course, we'll enjoy some lunch after that. And what I think is really important to know before we start that introductory question section is that we have looked already at a little bit of the sort of pros and cons of having these kinds of panels, so women in science panels, for example, and we can learn from those panels that have sort of happened already, where often we can get ourselves sort of focused on one specific situation or scenario that maybe women experience, and in the process exclude all kinds of other scenarios. So we want to try and sort of avoid those pitfalls by really focusing on what's really a useful takeaway for the audience and what can we learn from each other so that we can achieve success. right? So we want to try and keep that sort of theme at the forefront of our minds as we work through our discussion today. Okay? All right. So let's start with some introductory questions. We're going to begin with about 1 to 2 for the entire panel. Each panelist can choose to respond or not, so it's not that you must absolutely respond. And then after each question, we're going to encourage participants to discuss with each other what they think about the question, and then we'll come back together and have some discussion around that. So the first question that we want to share with you is the International Women's Day 2019 campaign theme of #BalanceForBetter is a call to action for driving gender balance across the world. In your personal experience, how does gender balance strengthen the workplace? So we'll open it to the panel first, and then we'll have interaction from the audience.
I'll start.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So thanks, welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming today on such an important day of celebration. And first of all, I'd like to say I'm a proud Brock alumni. So it's really special to be here. If I would have thought 20 years ago when I graduated to be here sitting along this panel with, distinguished women, having all of you in the audience, it's, you don't think about those things. So thank you for having me here today. So I guess in my field, it's interesting. So I'm in public sector, right? I work for the government, so at a local level, at a local area municipality. So Lincoln alone, delivers about over 90 programs and services. So when you think about, that gender balance in the work that we offer, we have to we're a small municipality. So when I say small, I mean small in terms of the number of employees we have. Geographically, we're a very large area, but we're small in terms of our employees. We need to be really resourceful, strategic, and we need to be really committed to delivering high quality services, right? That's what people expect. So having that different lens or perspective on issues, we often have that same vision of where we all want to, same outcome of where we want to go, but we may have a different vision of how to get there, and that's okay. And so I think to deliver those high quality of services and really make community impact, and at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build sustainable communities. That's really a huge responsibility now of local area municipalities. 20 years ago, that wasn't their vision. It is now. So, we have to have those different perspectives, because then we want to make sure that we're capturing all the potential barriers, opportunities, et cetera, that we can have in order to kind of make that impact in the community. So I think gender balance and any type of actual diverse opinion is really important in the workplace. It's not even just gender, but any type of diverse opinion, because it often gets you to a better place at the end of the day.
Great. Thank you, Kerry.
If I just add, so when I first started my career, quite a long time ago, I would be the only woman primarily in any meeting, or, I worked for a municipality for a long time in development planning. So there'd be many other people, engineers or planners, other professionals, architects, primarily all male. And I think it does, as Kerry said, it changes the perspectives that come into a conversation. So as time has gone on and more women are now involved and are in those professions and are welcomed into the conversation, I think we just get better results in the end. And I think that's what balance helps you get, is better results, maybe faster results, but you certainly have a way forward that diversity of opinions gets you.
I would definitely echo that same thought about getting results, because now our environment in business, environmentally, it's so complex that you can't expect just one pool of knowledge or set of skills to be able to solve it on its own. You need to have a comprehensive perspective and involve more people. If you're not involving women, you're leaving a huge percentage of the knowledge outside of the solution. So when you start bringing women into it, then you have a larger pool of knowledge to solve those complex issues that now are part of our society. And they are not going away. If anything, they are getting more difficult. So why not bring all that knowledge, all that skill, and really boost innovation together? And that's something that now women are starting to bring more and more into the workplace.
I love that. I'll chime in on that. I'm at the end of analyzing some data that's based on interviews around the research question, how do we most effectively build interdisciplinary research institutions to tackle complex challenges and sustainability challenges in particular? And some really exciting findings which are emerging, which echo what we're saying here, are that the gender balance of the team is very important for the outcomes that you see, and we're finding that in teams that have 3 or more women, we're seeing better results, and that kind of research echoes what we know is already published in sort of the business and marketing literature, but that applies here in sustainability too. So the gender balance of the team is really, the more balanced it is, the more effective outcomes we're seeing. And another really neat thing which is emerging from the data, which hopefully will go in for submission soon, so watch that space in the next few months. The other really cool thing is that when you have women in positions of leadership, you get a different kind of culture, and the culture that's necessary for sustainability challenges is one that's very creative, and it's kind of it's a novel space that we're working in. We're dealing with novel challenges, and you need to be quite vulnerable to come up with creative solutions. And women in leadership, what our data is telling us, tend to create cultures of inclusion, cultures of trust, and a different kind of space in which we can be quite creative together. So those are 2 really neat findings that are emerging from data, which echo the sort of experiences on the panel here. Yeah, more balance, the better, I think.
Yes. Thank you. Sustainability science, I think, nicely allows for that to happen in itself, and that, you know, it's really about reaching out and collaborating with others, not just researchers working together, but working in communities and engaging back and forth, learning from them. So I love that yes, I agree that we need diverse teams, as it is in sustainability science, to tackle wicked environmental problems. So you have someone coming from politics, someone coming from economics, geography, earth science, etc., to tackle these challenging issues. And then, of course, you also have good representation of the sort of population that's managing or trying to manage those challenges and come up with innovative solutions. And really an important piece for us, at least at the Environmental Sustainability Research Center, is about thinking innovatively around challenges that we face. So thank you to the panel. Now what I'd like to do is have the audience take a minute to just introduce, hopefully you warmed up a little bit. If you could introduce yourself to your neighbor, especially if it's someone that you don't know, just to share your name. And I do ask that if you have a contribution, that you just let the rest of the audience and the panel know your name, if you don't mind, so that we can maybe sort of make it more relaxed and have you feel comfortable about exchanging your ideas. So take a minute, and in the meantime, the panel can take a minute if you'd like to digest that question, and if you have anything else you want to add. Questions? All right. That's great. Thank you for taking the time to introduce yourselves. And now what we'd like to do is open up the floor again. This time hearing from anyone who would like to make a comment or you have a question. And please be reminded that we're very much eager to hear everyone. You don't all have to respond right now. We would like to hear from anyone who would like to make a contribution. So I'll remind you of the question. International Women's Day 2019, the campaign theme is #Balance for Better, and it's a call to action for driving gender balance across the world. In your personal experience, how does gender balance strengthen the workplace?
I'm Paul Spelzer. I'm with Facilities Management. I work with Mary. And Mary's a very welcome member of our team. She's only been here a short period of time, but certainly changing things. I'm a baby boomer, so I was born a long, long time ago. So when I graduated from university in the 70s and started my work, it was dominated by males. And decision-making was by whoever the top engineer of the day was. That's how decisions were made. And, you know, for the most part, they were likely good decisions, but through the years, as we become a more diverse society, have a lot more engineer engineers that are women. We're starting to get better decision making because of there's more inputs. And people's lifestyle, people's life experiences, people's education, those things are improving how we make decisions in engineering and getting better results. So I was very interested in the topic today, sustainability and the balance for a better world. And I think that we are living it here, and we should continue that as we move forward.
Thank you, Paul.
Can I add, or is it just the audience?
Absolutely. No. Anyone.
I was just talking to Julia about some of the topics that were brought up, and I think you kind of echoed what I was thinking. I've been in my career for a very short time, probably 10 years with the Remedial Action Plan program, and then prior to that I was in the academic world, and that's mostly male-dominated. Most of my colleagues were male. My supervisors have always been male. My advisors and mentors have always been male-dominated. But in my short 10 years, I was telling Julia, I have noticed a shift and a change. And when I first started, I would go to meetings like Ellen, and it was me and all men making decisions, and which I'll talk about later in terms of challenges. But I've noticed a shift just gradually. More and more, there are women and men at the table making decisions. There are more. There's more of a balance in the workplace in terms of who's, women are just not in administrative positions. They're making the decisions as well. They're leading teams. They're providing inputs, like you said. And I think that balance in the workplace just provides more expertise, more knowledge, and can mobilize people in a better way because you're having more inputs, as you noted.
Great, thank you, Natalie.
I'll maybe add one quick thing too, based on our conversation. Just thinking about the future of the workplace and what that might look like, and our program, Sustainability, Science, and Society. Every single year that we've had an intake, it's been the majority women in the program. And so when I think about what's going to happen in the next 10 years or 20 years and who's going to be in positions of leadership, what we're seeing is that there's overwhelming interest from women in sustainability, science-related issues, and I think that's very encouraging. I'm very encouraged by that. I think it's wonderful.
Okay. Are you ready for the next question? And at some point, if you wanted to add a comment, keep in mind that, of course, we'll welcome it. If something comes to mind that you could bring up later on, that's fine too. So we would like to know, can you provide a clear example of support or advocacy for women that you may have received within your career? So again, anyone on the panel who would like to respond?
I can go again, just because it piggybacks what I just said. Again, my career, I've always been led and mentored by males, and it's always been a very positive experience. And maybe not a specific example, but more of a general, I've always felt support from my male mentors, from my male colleagues, to achieve greatness and to be the best that I can be, regardless of any of our genders, but just knowing that expertise and education and experience has been fostered in me with my male colleagues, and I've never had a negative experience in that way. So it's the people that I've been surrounded with have always been advocates for just being great.
I have a different experience. I've experienced both. One example is at the beginning of my career, when I decided I wanted to become an engineer. That's not a typical choice, especially when you think mechanical, electronics. It's still not completely so many of my female friends, they would say, oh, that's not really feminine. Why don't you choose a different type of engineering or something else? And well, this is what I like. But it's that social stigma, and that's where really my family became my main advocate and supporter, because they told me, you're smart enough, you can do this. If that's what you want, who cares about what others say? So that was a milestone for me, that really they became my main advocate and supporter in that decision. And throughout my career, that has stuck with me, because many times, still in a few years back, not all the engineers are happy to see a woman sitting at the table and providing input. And some will not hire women because they they will just think, no, they will be going on maternity leave. There's still that mentality out there, especially in some of the sectors. Not everywhere, but it's still there. And you can still see it and feel it. So that's something that I found very interesting, and I have been very lucky to have support from both men and women alike as my mentors. But I think that milestone for me was with my family when they told me, you can do this, it's fine. And then I just rolled with it for my whole career.
Right, that's great.
So I guess for me, I've had an interesting career journey, which I was sharing with Ryan on the way over from Fieldhouse. So it's really only been like the last 14 years or so that I've been in public sector. So it's been interesting. And then in that part of that time in public sector, I was in public health, which is actually predominantly a lot of women. So I've had really great mentors. I've been lucky along the way. I've had 2 great medical officers of health that I've worked with here in Niagara who were advocates for everyone becoming better leaders, not just men or women, but everyone. Not just women, but everyone. So I've been really lucky, but I think what I've experienced now moving into the broader municipal context, working at a local area municipality, and sort of, we deal with both administration, so those are the staff that deliver the services, and then we have politicians, right, who are our governing body, right, our board of directors. And so that is predominantly in Niagara, middle-aged men, predominantly white as well. And it is traditionally a boys' club, and not to be negative, but that's the context, right? So, coming into that and trying to be a leader in my, in my area of expertise has been, interesting to sort of break that. And I've been lucky over the past couple of years actually to have a couple of men who have been great mentors and, have sort of made that initial invite into the room, which sometimes just that simple little step, their confidence in you then leads to the other people who might have questions about your comfortability based on your gender. So it's been an interesting experience for me, coming from I worked in brain injury services for a period of time, then into public health, and then into municipalities. So it's been a very diverse work experience in terms of, especially around gender balance. And so I would say, that it's just sometimes that simple invite that, my advice to sort of some of you in the room is find that mentor that's going to invite you in the room and show your value in your decision making, your advice, your guidance, your counsel, in whatever the issue is. So for us, I am really trying to get buy-in at a local level in terms of sustainability with our council, right? Because it's tough. There's lots of decisions, lots of public policy they need to make, but this is a really important for our CIO and for myself and for working with the Brock team. So, we're trying to get that buy-in, and so that's where we're always inviting Brock to our council meetings so that they can give that guidance and advice. And again, it's that simple invite in a number of issues. So
I would chime in that a couple of years ago, I started having kids, and a colleague of mine was also having kids at the same time, and we found a real sort of lack of tangible support that we could access to help us navigate that. So let me plug the work of my colleague who took that gap and just filled it. So she has dedicated herself half-time for the last number of years creating a resource for parents in academia. And she's just launched a website which is called Academic, so KID, for academic life. And it is a phenomenal resource that we didn't have access to that she's now created, which has got links for all kinds of things, such as how do you prepare for and navigate parental leave, both for men and women. How do you do field work with kids? Those types of things. So there's all kinds of resources, but a really beautiful, she's very clever, obviously, a really beautiful part of the website is it's not just advice, there's actual links to funding to help provide tangible resources for these kinds of things. So that is a resource I wish I had, and now we do have. So check that website out. It's called academic.com, academic, and it's a great resource. Yeah.
I saw that recently on Twitter too. Yes, which is great.
I'll add a quick thing maybe. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about hoping that there would be some students in the room, and there are, and I'm glad. Because I think one of the key points in my life and a turning point for deciding to even go to graduate school was a professor in my 4th year of my undergraduate degree who took an interest in me, and it wasn't me going out and finding somebody, it was somebody targeting me and saying, I think you have the potential to do this. And I think us kind of taking that proactive approach and thinking very clearly about creating those opportunities and just reminding people that these are options and that, you know, they're capable and they should be pursuing these sorts of things. Really made it was a huge turning point in my life in terms of, you know, where I am today versus where I might have been otherwise. I might be a farmer right now, which also is a really important job, but I think I'm quite happy in how things turned out. So I think that's an experience that has stuck with me for a really long time, and it's something that I try to think about, you know, in also supporting other women, other students in general.
So my experience hasn't been, I don't have any real, you know, that clear example of support or advocacy, but I think for me what has been instrumental has been other leaders, female that have been in positions senior to myself that have been inspirational to me. So early in my career, when I worked for the city of St. Catharines, the city solicitor was a woman who the mayor at the time took great pride in introducing to say, and she's a woman. But you know, just knowing that there were other women that I could look towards and that could be inspirational, that just seeing that they'd been successful in a male-dominated roles primarily at that time and still to a large degree today. So I think, you know, whether it's a person that's also in a workforce with you that's in a senior position that you can look towards, or Madame Curie, or, you know, other people in science and history that you know that can inspire younger women, children, girls, as well as ourselves. I think those are very important pieces of support for women as we go forward to get that balance. And I think it's important for not just for women. I mean, it's role models for us, but also for men to also look towards. Young boys, for example, can be inspired also and see that there are women that can do those roles and be successful.
All right, we'll open it up to the audience. Shady.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Shady. I'm a Master of Sustainability student. I'm really excited because I'm a woman. And in my culture, the place of women is in the kitchen. That's the culture. There's such a glass ceiling that we have to actually hit it and hit it first to be able to get into the room. So women are not invited into the room. They're not invited into management spaces, but gradually that's changing. And you know, when I started my career, my mom told me that I'm very smart, and if I could find a way, I should make a way. I should break the door, I should hit on it. But I was lucky when I got a job. My boss, I think he looked at me and saw potential, and he told me he was going to bring me to the management meeting. This was a meeting that had only men, and it had been only men for years. And I know that the person that came into the meeting, they kept glancing at me. I kept looking at me. I think the one people going around the company that shapes and I became sort of like a star. But you know, I read a lot, I found out a lot. What I didn't know, I asked, so that when I made contributions, it was actually useful, so they didn't think, oh, I told you she was a woman and she doesn't know anything, she's not smart. You know, so women are actually smart. We just need to believe in ourselves. If you find a real mentor who really believes in you, probably hold on to him, show him that you're smart. If he takes you into the room, don't disappoint him, go back and say, it won't work. Yeah. So I'm really excited. It's different here in Canada, and I believe that gradually back home it will get better for me.
Thank you, Shady. Anyone else want to comment or have a question?
I do. Just for Ellen, now in your senior role, do you find yourself inspiring other people and purposely, you know, in terms of mentorship and so on, given your stature now that you have and that experience, or are there certain things?
Well, I kind of hope I do, but
it inspires me every day.
No.
There you go.
It's something that, you know, with the staff or other people that I work with more indirectly, I do try to to be inspiration, to encourage people to expand themselves, to do their best. Maybe touch on some topics a little bit later on, but the idea of relationships and relationships with all levels within organizations and outside is incredibly important to me, and incredibly important, I think, to being successful.
I just sort of hearing some of the stories and kind of building on what Shay said. So I can share a story. It was very shortly after I started at Lincoln. And at that point, our CAO was kind of rebuilding our senior management team, looking at different and diverse roles that the organization hadn't had before. And so I was kind of going to a meeting with our CAO, the mayor, and one of our counselors. And so I come into our CAO's office and I sit down, and the counselor turned to me and said, "Thank you so much for bringing the coffee and sandwiches. That was great of you to do today." And I kind of looked and I thought, is he talking to me? And I realized he was. And I said, "No, actually, I'm here for the meeting. I'm going to provide you some support and guidance and advice." And, we have a female mayor, which is amazing. So she spoke up and said, "Did I just hear what I just heard?" And she was like, "Kerry's here to really provide us, with some really great information, and has been, and so again, that's that example of, being in the room and having someone who speaks up for you and sort of because, in our world of hierarchy, she oversees her council. And so for that counselor to hear it coming from the mayor meant a lot to me in terms of her belief in, what I brought and the value I brought to the organization. But so I'm saying, like, as recently as 2 years ago, right? I've been at Lincoln 2.5 years. So we are still facing, some of that perception, but I could have used that as a really negative moment in my career and been discouraged but I didn't. I kind of thought, okay, how do I get this counselor to realize the potential I have and what I'm going to bring to this organization? And to this day, I'm still fighting to get that counselor to believe in who I am and what I can bring to the organization, but I'm not going to give up because, I think at the end of the day, that's the responsibility I have. And for those that I support, those that I mentor, those that work with me, I want them to see that you can't let those sort of, you're going to get those negative experiences at some point, and you just kind of got to use them to figure out how do you make that better. So I just wanted to build on that point of Shay and being in that room.
No, and I think you're pointing to something really important that, even the way we refer to it as a negative experience, right? It's a barrier that I think you have to, if we're going to have that conversation, you have to at least acknowledge that it's there and what it is, so that we can overcome it, right? I just want to add that I think it's interesting, Alan, what you were saying, and I often think about how can I play a role now that I'm, an associate professor. I've been here for, at least half my career now, and so how can I play that role, and even beyond that, because I think it starts, these kinds of conversations start at a very young age. And I'll use a non-kind of academic, for fun, a non-academic example, because I think it's important that we acknowledge this extends far beyond our careers and starts very early in life. And early in life, around the time I was about 12, I was a big fan of hockey. And that is, kind of an unusual thing for a young girl. And I noticed that, I enjoyed hockey. And in the summer, I liked baseball. My dad was really happy about that because I was the fourth of 4 girls, and he thought, oh my God, I might have a boy here. and so that was actually weird navigating that because my sisters didn't play, but I had 3 male coaches that were all of about 18. And these young men treated my team of course, all young women so professionally, and just really focused on us developing the skills we needed to play the game. And I really learned a lot from that, actually. That kind of changed my mindset about a few things. And I started to really embrace ringette and hockey and those sports I liked. And I loved baseball so much that when I had my son, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go a little bit out of my comfort zone, and I'm going to coach his team, which I would, right? But I did. And it was a very interesting interaction. These boys were about 4 to 5 years old, and if you've ever coached baseball at that age, you can imagine, right? But I had some interesting comments from those young boys, and to this day, when I walk through the hallway at my son's school, there are still boys there, they're now 9, 10 years old, that call me coach. Right? And I think I made a difference in their life. So I think it's important to think about, how can we kind of build those important connections and make people aware that, we can kind of overcome or, manage some of these barriers and move forward in important ways. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It does extend beyond the workplace, and it does start really young. And it starts with all of us and our kids, because they're the next generation. And I have two little girls, and my oldest one is 8, and she's very much into sports. She's very athletic. She loves gym. It's probably her favorite class. And she's had already experiences. She's only 8 years old, where little boys have told her, "But you can't do this. You're a girl, and this is just for boys." And she's very vocal, and she often comes home and she's like, "I stepped up and I said, I can do this. I can do the same as you, and look at me." And she's very proud. And I think that comes from parents and dads, particularly, instilling that in their little girls, as saying, and little boys as well, that it goes both ways, that there shouldn't be gender barriers. There are in society, but we can overcome those, and it starts when they're very little.
Yeah, I think education is a really important piece of that.
Just to jump on the education piece, my name's Colleen. I'm currently a master's student doing my master's of education in administration and leadership. And so for me as a teacher, like hearing all these things, my mind's swimming with so many thoughts. So there's 2 things I want to say. One of them was, I think it was a video or a TED Talk related to the Bechdel test, which, if anyone doesn't know, the Bechdel test is a test for when you watch movies to kind of get a better sense of how they're representing women. And part of that is, the test essentially is you're looking and seeing, okay, are there more than one woman in the movie? Do they talk to each other? And do they talk to each other about something other than men? And if you go through that test with movies, it's actually terrifying how many movies you would think should pass that test that don't. But one of the comments that the man who's speaking about this says is that it's really important to him when he's showing his children movies to make sure that they pass the Bechdel test. And a huge part of it is, for his son, he says, I want my son to look at women and see someone who they want to be on their team. And I think that's just such an important part of the message. I feel like with feminism, there can be a lot of focus on raising strong young women, which is wonderful, but we also need to focus on how the young men are growing up to perceive women, and that's a huge kind of piece of the puzzle. And the other thing I wanted to say is just related to representation and what you guys were talking about, and how young it starts, these kind of closed doors that young girls start seeing for what they can accomplish and what direction they can go in their lives. So for me as a teacher, it's so encouraging to see more and more women holding these positions that young girls can look up to, and that I can bring into my classrooms and use as examples of all the things they can accomplish. Because the first step is really seeing yourself in those future positions and opening your eyes and realizing that there are no limitations to what you can accomplish, and there's nothing saying that you can't head in that direction. Because I think it's really hard. It's crazy how, like, I'm a science teacher, and I often teach grade 8, and it's crazy how in grade 8 you can have students come into class, they already are bound and determined that they're bad at science. They have already made that decision, they've already been told that by their grades or by their teachers, and it's almost like I have to spend a whole bunch of energy just being like, we all can do this, and just getting everyone to kind of tear that down. But it's a big job, and it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people before we get where we need to be.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah, that's great. I'm encouraged to hear that, because I think it's important to have that messaging, right, from sort of multiple interactions people have in their lives.
I love that sentiment, and just to share hopefully some good news stories, I just shared an article that just came out in Science via Twitter, if you want to go find the real article, but it followed children's drawings of scientists over about a 40-year period, and in the 60s there was like 1 out of 100 kids drew a woman as a scientist, and now I think it's up to 1 in 3. So 30% are being represented as women. So that is quite encouraging. And yeah, still work to be done, but movement in the right direction. Yeah.
Well, it's fantastic that you drew our attention to you, because now we're going to go into the next phase with the paired questions, or panel pair-specific questions. And both Jessica and Kerry are in the first, and the theme is around communication. So the first question, so I'll ask 2 questions. The panel will have a conversation after the first question and the second question, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So the first question of 2 is, have you ever felt as though you couldn't communicate effectively, or you were not being heard due to your gender? And if so, how did you combat this?
I'll jump in first because I'm first at the table. So I had an experience recently within the last year. I was at a workshop at the University of British Columbia, and there was a senior male colleague who was at the workshop whom I really respected his work, and I thought, all right, now is my face-to-face chance to connect with this individual. Hopefully it will lead to collaborations going forward. So I went up to him and I introduced myself and I said, I'm Jessica. I've just taken a tenure track faculty position at Brock University. And the very first thing he said to me was, oh, shame. I just inherited the office of a female colleague who didn't get tenure because she spent too much time with her graduate students and too much time with her kids. So right off the bat, I wasn't able to communicate with him because he viewed me as a non-colleague because I wouldn't get tenure because of my gender, you know? And so that is something that we probably, everyone, there's a sort of expectation with younger women that gender bias isn't there anymore, but that was a real clear example to me that it is alive and well, even though we are making progress, that was shocking. So 2 ways I guess I try and combat that. Number 1, it is so motivating, and I'm so angry about it that I will publish more papers this year thanks to him. So that's one thing, sort of long term. But something that's a little bit shorter term, and something that I've tried to do, and I talk about this with my female colleagues, is we try to promote each other's work actively to remedy that bias and that balance. So I find social media to be a really powerful ally that sort of levels the playing field because we can post whatever we want. So I actively promote the work of my female colleagues, and I actually have a calendar reminder to myself at least once a month to make sure that I'm sending out my colleagues' work so that we are trying to actively sort of remedy that balance, I guess. So those are 2 ways that I'm trying to balance for better, I guess.
And I guess for me, I mean, we all have to acknowledge at some point in our life we don't communicate effectively regardless. It's a challenge. And in the world of communications and working in public relations, it's an ongoing, it's an evolving world, right? And when I first started in this field, I mean, you often heard the term spin doctors or how are you going to spin this? And whereas that's not at all what our role is. It's evolved, I mean, maybe back in the 70s and, the old PR ad agency firms, but it's more of a we kind of joke we're the moral compass of our organization. So, we're holding ourselves and our organization accountable. And when we make a mistake, we acknowledge it, and we figure out how to do that in a way that's going to, meet whatever that error has been, right? So I think for me, because I'm in the world of public relationships are really important to me. So that's how I think I combat ineffectively communicating. And an example I guess I can give is that, I try to always figure out where people are coming from and, their story. And so when I'm thinking about communicating, it's, where are they coming from? What's the influence their life experiences? And, especially now in the world I'm in, I gave my earlier example of that interaction with a counselor. I try to always think about that now when I'm approaching anybody and think, okay, well, how can I make this a successful conversation? How can I get my point moved forward? How can I get buy-in? And then there's the whole larger community issue where I work, to try and get the community to buy into what we're doing and to have behavior change and apply, the policy that we're developing. So, it's really understanding, I think, your audience and, what motivates them, their attitudes and beliefs, and, building those really important relationships. So that would be sort of my best advice to everyone. And it's not always an easy thing. It's not, because your own life experience, your past experience, next time Jessica sees that gentleman, she's going to be still a bit guarded, right? Even though she's an extremely talented, intelligent woman. And so, but you can't help but now be a bit guarded around that person. So I think, just always try to build that relationship and find kind of what their story is, where they're coming from. So.
I really like that. It resonates with me because we talked a lot in organizing this event around the importance of getting the audience to engage and encouraging that interaction, recognizing that words matter. Those were your exact words, that words really matter. And I think we all thought about that before coming today, that we don't, in our communication, want to exclude voices from everyone, right? So it's really important. And how do you engage with someone who's maybe got a different perspective on a situation? And so that's a really great point that you're making, Kerry. Does anyone else on the panel want to add to that? Okay, hold your thoughts, audience. Yeah, you're meant to engage, but not right now. So the second question for this pair is, how can feminism motivate real behavioral change and climate action?
Okay, thank you. I'll start again. I just wanted to make 2 points around this question. So the fact is, climate change is inherently gendered, and I think we often forget that. And there's 2 components to that. So the first part is that climate change impacts women disproportionately more than men, and that's something that we often forget. So most of my research is based in the quote-unquote global south or developing world, and women in those communities are often on the front line of climate change impacts. So as Shay was mentioning, they're often involved with collecting firewood, being in the kitchen, and they're often in vulnerable positions. They're more highly affected by displacement as a result of climate change. They're often on the front lines of climate extremes. I work with a lot of women fishers who often glean, which means they pick up shellfish essentially from the near shore, and they are very vulnerable to big storm events and that type of thing. So 1/2 of climate change being gendered is that women are bearing the brunt more so than men. But the other half, which I love that Mary's already touched on, is that climate change is our grand challenge as a human society, and we have half the knowledge on how the solutions will unfold are held by women. So of course, why in what world would we want to exclude half of the ideas, half of the innovation? And so I guess the encouraging thing for me is that a lot of my academic heroes in the climate change space are women. So Kate Brown from the University of Exeter and Karen O'Brien, who's at the University of Norway, they are 2 huge thinkers in the field, and one of the biggest contributions that they've made is around what now is sort of everyone knows, but the human dimensions of climate change, which really wasn't part of the conversation 10 or 20 years ago. So recognizing that climate change is more than numbers, it's more than storms being recorded, it's really about the lived experience, and women's voices have been critical in raising that issue. And a little bit closer to home, there's all kinds of phenomenal research going on about climate change impacts via female researchers and colleagues. And a neat one I just wanted to flag is colleagues Nadine Marshall and Georgie Gurney have just published a paper on what they're calling reef grief. And so they're actually there on site as the Great Barrier Reef is dying, the largest living structure that we can see from space, where it's going to die. And people feel that. And their research is one of the first to actually document what that means for us as a society. And I think, to me, those are kind of exciting, innovative spaces that women scientists are being very active in terms of climate change.
Thank you, Jess.
And so I come from it at a different perspective only because I'm not a content expert or researcher in climate change. So I really am taking the research that you are all working on, helping build that public policy at a local level, and then communicating it out to our community to have that real community change and impact. So for me, when I think about feminism, I mean, it is a collective movement. It's a thought. It's a collective thought. And so, you know, how do you use that momentum? You know, and I think often around feminism, it's been a great storytelling, like a great story. Like, we're good at telling the story. And so I think about that and how do we use and build on storytelling to really affect behavioral change at a local level. And, you know, I think back to an example in Lincoln, we had quite a big storm in, I have to get my dates right, but I think it was 2016, significant shoreline damage, rising water levels, and so we had to evacuate people. And, you know, that was the first time in Lincoln's history, I guess, that they, you know, had evacuated, or it was a, you know, it was a pretty big deal. And it's funny, until that incident, I mean, the residents who live along the shoreline have always been concerned about what that is, you know, what's happening, what the effect of the rising lake level is having on them. But what was really interesting was, until they actually had to leave their homes and think about not getting emergency services, that they really got motivated to get engaged. But what I wanted to say was, it was mostly the female leaders in their families that were affected mostly by this, and thinking about their responsibility. And so, you know, we've heard from, whereas before we were hearing from a lot of the property owners, but predominantly the man in the household that was, you know, kind of wondering what's going on, what's the town doing around the shoreline. But then after that incident, it was really interesting to see the shift in engagement of women that were coming into town hall and asking about what our plans are and how can they help and what's the next step. So I think, like I'm saying, that storytelling and then those life experiences, I think, can affect real change around climate action. But again, I come at a different perspective because I'm not a researcher and really apply it like the rest of you do. So I guess that's my advice, is the storytelling aspect more.
I think Kerry touched base on something really, really important, which is the momentum that climate change is building for feminism. There have been projects for the International Energy Agency that have been going on for about 4 years in Rwanda, where they have assigned funding for women to run solar energy companies. They have been installing solar panels, powering their communities, and all these companies, installation, maintenance, everything is done by women. So really, that's an example where the green economy is creating that momentum for women to become empowered, to really open opportunities for them, and they have been successfully done not only there, but in other locations as well. So I think there's this critical mass that climate change has created, both for women as a challenge, but also it has created these opportunities that are starting to gain that momentum that Kerry mentioned, that should be moving forward. And it's everyone's job to make sure that we keep that momentum and that we don't lose it.
Thank you, Mary. Any other comments from the panel? I'll remind the audience of the questions, and then we'll take some feedback from you. So, have you ever felt as though you couldn't communicate effectively, or you were not being heard due to your gender? And if so, how did you combat this? And then, how can feminism motivate real behavioral change and climate action? So, is it anyone from the audience want to make a contribution or have a question about that?
Okay.
Oh, hey, Bob.
So I've been in management for a long time, and when I first started managing people, I had a lot of younger people that were really good and smart in what they were doing, but they really didn't know how to communicate their thoughts and options and how to work through problems. And after getting to know them a little bit better, I found that they were afraid. They were afraid, and it wasn't just females; it was males too. And they were afraid of the situation. They were afraid of the environment. They were afraid of their thoughts not being received well. So I started telling, whenever I would have my one-on-ones, my annual meetings, I would talk to them in terms of not about how good a job they were doing, but how good a job they were presenting the information they were working on. So I think it's very important that we have voices and that we make sure that everybody understands that they have a voice and that they can't be afraid. Don't be afraid to voice your opinion. It's not always going to be accepted, and you're going to have to take the good with the bad, and you're not always going to, and it motivated you when you didn't get something that you wanted to see. But just make sure that you understand not to be afraid, and you use your voice and you voice your opinions. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more women in the sciences and engineering that are doing well, because they're being stronger, they're voicing their opinions, and they're not afraid anymore. And I would encourage that to continue, and the communications is really, really important for not only women but young professional men as well.
That's a really great point, Paul. I agree entirely. It's just so important. Fear can hold back so many great opportunities and ideas. And I think that's a really important piece, is that we encourage people and acknowledge that they are afraid, or they may be. To try and break that barrier down. That's great. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Okay, let's move to the next panel, or pair rather, on the panel. So I'll remind everyone that we're talking with Julia and Natalie here in the center of the panel around the theme of water. And the first question I have for both of you is, what are some of the barriers or challenges you were able to overcome in order to be successful in your career? Sorry, there was a typo and I tripped me up. So wait a minute.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier I've had a fairly positive experience in my career, but I have still had challenges along the way. One of which is just the way that I look. I'm petite. As you can see, I look very young, and I was in a position that had to deal with senior managers often. I had to go to meetings and basically have people do work for me that don't work for me. That is basically my role. I try to facilitate partnerships and try to get things done toward a particular goal, but all of these people are not my staff, and they're typically higher on the hierarchy chain than I am. So one of the challenges just really being me in a room, and being able to overcome that is just using confidence and believing in myself. And somebody mentioned it earlier, is being confident will take you so far. And it just as an example, when I decided to leave the Detroit River position that I was in, somebody who I had worked with for a really long time, who was in the industry sector and quite high up in that position, confessed to me that when he first met me, I had walked into a boardroom similar to you, Ray, all men, and I'd walked in, and I think all of them thought that I was probably there to bring snacks. And he said to me, the first time that I met you, I thought, who is this young girl walking into this room? I think he thought I wasn't supposed to be there. And then he said, I really wasn't sure why you were there. And then you started talking. And you were confident, and you knew what you were talking about, and you were intelligent, and you really were, not powerful, but, showed up in a room. And that to me was a huge compliment, but it really spoke to some of the challenges that I had in that position, was being able to be present in a room and to make myself taller and older than I was, so that I could get things done in the partnership context that I was working in.
That really resonates with me too. I mean, I don't know that I look young for my age, but
you do.
Oh, thanks, Ron. It doesn't matter if I do or not, really. But you feel it sometimes that you're a junior faculty member or you're a student, and you feel like you maybe can't say the things that you want to say, and so you find strategies to cope. And one of the ways I do that is by the way I dress. Mm-hmm. And I try to be very professional in the way that I dress, because I think it gives an outward appearance of authority and kind of competency,
credibility.
Yeah, and it's something that I think as women think about quite a lot, and it sounds very shallow, but it's not. It has a fundamental impact. That's in addition to what I was going to say, but thank you. That really resonated. So one of the things that I was thinking about when I was contemplating my response to this question was, my career is still really early. So what I think I'm going to focus on is how I got here, and kind of that process. And one of the, I think, barriers or challenges that I felt is not necessarily specific to being a woman, but I think that being a woman probably contributed to it. It's feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I think a big chunk of that is related to being a first-generation university graduate. So my parents were farmers, and my mom graduated high school the same year I did, actually, which was super cool. We had our graduation party the same night. That's a little awkward. But I think, there are challenges that come with that, and one of that is feeling less prepared for what comes after high school. So when I started university, I was in a classroom and I felt like all of these other people know a lot of things that I don't know, and they seem so, interesting and smart, and I felt a little less like I was prepared for those sorts of challenges that come with being a university student at all. And then going on to graduate school, well, that was entirely uncharted territory, and it still is. And I think that, there's a lot of pride that comes with being in that position, but there are huge challenges that come with it too. And the one thing that really helped make that possible was a really good support system. My parents, even though they didn't have a university education, were extremely supportive of me pursuing whatever I wanted to in university, and so that meant that I had to take a couple of tries before I found the right thing, but that was fine. And throughout kind of all stages of study, and in my postdoctoral fellowship, I'll give a shout out to Ryan for sure, there have been people that have actively supported my, desire to continue my education, and created kind of that feeling of you can do it and you should do it, and serving as sources of inspiration. So we talked earlier about, feeling inspired by people in these sorts of positions, and I can list a whole long list of women professors that I have found really inspiring, and women whose work I found really inspiring. And all of those things contribute to kind of alleviating or making those challenges easier to overcome.
I just have to say, I had almost the exact same experience as her. So I come from a very, very small town, not rural, but a little gold mining town. And I was the first generation going to university, in the exact same imposter syndrome. And just a takeaway for all of you younger people in the room is that really the biggest barrier is your own self. And sometimes it's just having some self-talk, and that imposter syndrome is in your head, and it's true. It was there from the beginning, and regardless of the support that I had from my parents, they were very supportive and always said, you can do whatever you want, we will support you. It was just overcoming my own, doing a lot of self-talk and just saying, I can do this, and I am here for a reason, and I should. So just a reminder for all of you that give yourself that self-talk and believe in yourself, because it will get you so far.
And if I could just add on to that, sorry, because it's so funny that when you start to hear, people's personal life experience. So I'm the same as the two of you as well. I'm a first generation small town girl, so, but you know what? I got great advice early on in my career, and this was by a woman leader, and she was surrounded. She was the only female leader in part of so this was at Niagara Region. She was the medical officer of health, and she was surrounded by all men as part of the corporate leadership team, who were all really great people. But her advice to me was, have presence, Kerry. Have presence when you walk in the room. Have confidence and presence. So I just wanted to build on that, because until you said that, I thought, you know what, it's funny, I didn't realize how much that resonated with me until you said that. I think that was back in 2006 or 7, right, when I first started working for her, and she really believed that I had a lot to contribute to the organization, but I would walk in the room and have the exact same thing. And the other part being, I didn't have a medical or a public health background at that time, like applied public health. So I was nervous sitting in the room, and do I, and I'm part of this management team, and do I say anything? And she has to have presence, so yeah, owe that to her.
I'm going to chime in. We're going down the road. In terms of the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome, that is so rampant. And there's, research that shows 8 out of 10 of us have it. It's everyone's got it. And you find mentors in weird places. I worked for the Writing Center at UVic during my PhD, and my boss there was phenomenal. And she always said something to me, which applies for both graduate school, but I think the working world too, is you're smart enough to get in here, so you're smart enough to get out of here. And that was to us fumbling around in grad school, just being like, I don't think I'm going to make it. And that always stuck with me, and I always thought that brings me comfort, And so if that is of comfort to anyone, then maybe it's useful. Yeah.
It totally applies to the working world. Someone was confident enough to hire you, they had confidence in your abilities to deliver that, so yeah.
Okay, I find that really interesting. I'm going to go the opposite way then, because I actually didn't have support from my parents at all, because they thought like, whoa, no, this is not a good. The same thing that my sisters had all gone in to own their own business, etc. And my parents didn't know anything about university, so. And I was even living on my own at the time, and I was like, no, I'm actually going to work 3 jobs and get the money to go and support myself. They couldn't support me. That might have been why they were discouraging me from don't go. But so I looked to others outside of family. I mean, my sisters were supportive, but I looked to others, and typically they were found in very bizarre places. So one of the 3 jobs I worked was at a Swiss chalet, and the boss there would be incredibly supportive and would allow me, shockingly, not to attend employee meetings on Saturdays when I had work I needed to do or when I had an exam. And actually it was him, because I almost worked really full-time in a way. Like I worked 30 plus hours in my undergrad, and he really allowed me to engage with my schoolwork in a way that made me successful. So I was really happy about that. Yeah, so there are these different, the outcome can be the same. I too felt the imposter syndrome. But that, it's important to realize that community in strange places can make a big difference. Just when you think you're not. That employer, I don't know if he ever realized how supportive he was of me, but I never, at the time, I thanked him, but I didn't really thank him the way I might today, right? That's great. Okay. Let's get to the second question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So, Julia, your research focuses on human dimensions of water, and Natalie, your job focuses on water management. What role, if any, have you seen diverse teams have in the success of water management goals or in your research?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it.
So the program that I lead is a multi-stakeholder, multi-jurisdictional program. It is inherently made to have a diverse group of people work together. I am the facilitator of that group, and the Remedial Action Plan is basically, it's not an organization, it's a title for a group of people working together towards a similar goal. So in terms of water management, and with the Niagara River, water in particular, it belongs to all of us. We all have a role, regardless of which organization you work with, where you live. We all have an impact and a role in water, and to have a diverse team work together, in my opinion, is extremely successful, and I have many experiences of where that has been successful, and is, in my opinion, like the only way to go. To have the right people at the table sitting together, giving them the opportunity to have discussions, partnerships, and providing input. I think you had mentioned earlier, having many people at the table provides more input, and you get a better end product towards the goal that you're trying to get to. So, I think the more diverse teams that you can put together, relevant, of course, you want everybody sitting at the table understanding why they're there and knowing what their role is, can have such a big impact on what you're trying to accomplish.
Yes, that. And from a research perspective, and I know you engage with research too. I mean, the underlying assumption to the research I do, and that I think a lot of us at the center do, is that systems are complex. Our world is really complex. The problems that we're experiencing are really complex. And when we think about water is just a wonderful example of that complexity. And one of the reasons is that a lot of water just doesn't stay put. And it's influenced by everything else that's happening around us. It's influenced by climate change, and it's certainly influenced by the decisions that we are making about it. Whether or not we know that those decisions are having an impact on water, they are. So that said, one single person is not sufficient to solve any sort of problem related to water. We need those multiple perspectives, both in terms of like disciplinary expertise, but also in terms of like representation of the broader of society, because we're all impacted, and we know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted when there are issues with climate and also with water specifically. So I know that there's been a lot of efforts to ensure greater representation of women in decision-making around water. The UN has been really good in promoting that, and the World Water Day this year, the theme is leaving no one behind, and that focuses specifically, one of their kind of focuses of that theme is women and girls. And so I think, more and more attention is being brought to that, and that's really important. And so, in terms of kind of water-related research, it's critical to have women's perspectives. In many places in the world, decisions about water are primarily made by men, but women and girls are most affected. So changing that is really important, and I think will continue to improve the way that we govern and manage our water. In terms of the research that I do and have been involved with, I mean, as long as I've been at Brock, which is now like 7, 8, I keep saying 7 years, but I feel like I've been saying that for like 2 or 3 years now, so it's longer than 7 years. But yeah, I've been fortunate to be on a lot of collaborative teams that are at least balanced, if not more women than men on the teams. And I think that, the diversity of perspectives that are brought together in terms of our disciplinary expertise, but also, bringing other diversity into that team is really important. And has really, improved even the way that we approach problems, and the possibilities that we consider as a group are different when you work collaboratively. So yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thank you both.
I would only add,
yes.
I was reading this paper years ago about water and the importance of water, and they were trying to do some environmental capitalism to assign a value to the resources. Water was one of them. And the number that they came up was, I thought at the moment, ridiculous, because it would not fit on the paper. But now that I think back on it and I listen to what you are saying, it's absolutely true, because we need water for everything, and it's yet the most undervalued resource that we have. We need water for producing energy, for producing food for ourselves, for health and safety. And yes, women are the most exposed and most vulnerable to water shortages. So why, with such a critical issue for our society and for our environment, women should not be a more active part of it? Because it's, again, women and girls that have been collecting water from the rivers, that are fighting for social justice. So why not be a more active participant in this huge challenge that we have for this most valuable resource? Because we need water for everything, or we won't be here.
Exactly. Water is not optional.
I'll remind the audience of the 2 questions. as Natalie and Julia just addressed, were what, if any, are some of the barriers or challenges that you were able to overcome in order to be successful in your career? And secondly, what role, basically, if any, whether in your job or in research that you've conducted, have you seen diverse teams have success in water management goals? So now we'll open the discussion to the audience and take questions or comments. Anything that resonates. Yes, Katie, please.
I just want to share the challenge I had for entrance because I was a woman. When I went into the interview for my last job, and I got into the room, I was told, oh no, this is the interview for the head of department, administrative assistant over there. You know, and I think why that happened was because of my name. My name is unisex. So I let them thought I was a man. Yeah, and when they looked at my qualifications, they were like, this is a good man. So that's why they invited me. Thought I was a man. And my predecessor was a man. Yeah. And I was the only woman being interviewed for that position. But unfortunately for them, I did better than all the men. And when I got on board, I had another problem. 80% of the people who were reporting to me were male. Yeah. And they wouldn't report to the woman. They didn't support me. They didn't tell me where the files were. I think they hid some information from me so that I would fail, you know. But I worked harder than everybody. I became an intern. I would go to different departments and ask them what they were doing. So, you know, I had a good knowledge of the entire company, learning by myself. So when I got into that management meeting, for the first few meetings, I didn't say anything. I just observed and watched and read my book. She doesn't even want to say, but she's not smart. You know, but I was learning. And when I started speaking, you know, they saw that I knew what I was saying. So I was talking to myself, like I said. I used to have this self-talk. I told myself, you're smart. Because it was really frustrating. You can imagine the people working with you, not supporting you just because I was a woman. You know, it was really frustrating. And they would have to side meetings and say, she's a woman. The woman tell us what to do. And it's Nigeria. Women don't tell men what to do. You know, so I learned, I worked harder, I changed the way I dressed, you know, just like Julia said, I became a power dresser just to prove a point, you know, and I think that it became like an encouragement to other women. When they saw that I was doing it, they knew that they could do it. I mentored the women on my team and I told them, you can come on board, you know. And when I was leaving, you know, the entire company actually said, you know what, we thought, you know, a woman couldn't do this job. So women are actually smart. My sister actually is an engineer. She has this same challenge where she works. She's the only male in the male, she's an engineer. And she comes home, she's frustrated, she's crying sometimes. I tell her, you're smart. You know, go back there and you know, show them what you can do. So that's the way I overcame those challenges. And it's challenges that I had throughout my career, but I was able to overcome.
Thank you, Shay. It's great to get different perspectives on these experiences that people have. I think we can learn a lot from that. Sam.
So I'm Samantha Sam. I do academic advising and communications on campus. So my experience was similar to yours, where I was the first one to go to university and the first one to go to grad school. So thankfully, I worked with Ryan actually in undergrad, and he saw potential in me and invested a lot into me and the rest of the research team that we were working with. But it's kind of neat now as an academic advisor because I can use my experiences and I constantly see students who are in the exact same position, where I had a student come in this week, a female student, who said, you know, I have 30 cousins and none of them have gone to university. I'm the very first one out of everyone in my family to go. I don't know how to apply to grad school. I don't know what to do. Like, where do I even start? Who do I ask? And so it's kind of neat being able to use experiences that I've had and also connecting with faculty members and other staff on campus to be able to use my experiences to help students now. So it's not, I mean, it's not a challenge. It's just something that, it was a challenge that now I get to use to help others, which is kind of neat.
No, that's great. We're fortunate to have you in that role, right? So that you can do that.
I'm Leanne. I work at the technical camp with Kerrys.
Yes.
Don't have
a science background at all. So feeling that imposter syndrome. But I left a job to work with Kerry at the town of Lincoln, and what I found helped me, and still helps me every day, is finding a really positive role model, or more than one, that can help you and inspire you, and just the difference that it's made coming from my old job to this job has been so impactful and so amazing. So just wanted to share that.
No, that's great. That's very helpful. I think it's important to surround yourself, and this is what I did too. Early days, I started noticing people who tend to get the attention of the room, and I would start kind of surrounding myself with people who overall were very positive and very inclusive. And I just found that I fed off of that a little bit, and I started to realize, I want to be. So there were at times people with different perspectives, and maybe I didn't entirely appreciate them, but just instead tried to find those connections with people who I saw and were very supportive.
And it really helps you find your place within the organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you can get down to the real work that you're there to do, right? Which is fantastic. I really enjoy being surrounded by, the folks in the ESRC, my project partners, men and women, right, as well as the director of RESRC, of course, Ryan, he's incredibly encouraging. Yeah, it's really important. I think that's one great way, is to surround yourself by like-minded people, if you will, in that particular sense.
Can I just make one tiny little comment? This is based on something that I guess has been kind of sitting in the back of my brain for a long time, but I didn't really know how to express it. And then I read this opinion piece in the Globe and Mail about a week ago, maybe. And it was talking about women in the workplace and empowering women in the workplace, and that there's a danger that we shift to a model. And it's not to say that it's not important for us to take ownership, but there's a danger in making it all about it's on you as a woman to go out and do what you need to do to be okay and to be considered equal in the workplace. And I think, yes, to some extent, but also this article was kind of critiquing that and saying that it's also at least as much, if not more, up to everyone else in positions where you can create that capacity for women to do that. So I think that's a challenge to all of us, wherever we are at in life, is to try to be conscious of it and create those opportunities, and not make it about just about women having to do it all on their own, or to expend all of that energy to get into the types of positions that they should be in, because that does take energy. It takes time and energy away from doing good work.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, Julie. So it's funny, I had this conversation actually with colleagues about 2 weeks ago, male colleagues, because they kind of joke all the time, because I do talk a lot to them about kind of how they're perceiving women in the workplace and equality, and they don't necessarily see it. That's the and so I try to always give them concrete examples. Like after a meeting, I'll say, this, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about how what you were saying versus what someone else was saying was treated completely differently, but it was, right? And so it's just, I think we do have that responsibility to help others understand how they can have that impact, but it isn't just on us. I get that. But I'll tell you, I feel incredible pressure to be a mentor to women in the workplace, and to, try and stay positive all the time about, some of those challenges or barriers you face. And, I never want to not be that role model who isn't showing solutions, but I feel every day incredible pressure in the workplace, and I guess maybe it's the environment I'm in currently, and I'd never in my other careers along the way have felt that. So I'm trying. So I need to read that article, but I just want to say that you do. I think it's important for us to help others understand how they can help in the workplace as well. So
I'm just thinking valid. At higher levels, at the kind of institutional level, can we also, create not necessarily more training programs where women need to take time out of their day and go do these things so that they learn strategies to, be considered equal. We can be a little more creative about what that looks like, maybe.
Ellen and then Jess and okay.
Well, I think we're doing it today anyway. We have some wonderful men in the audience with us today. Well, not just the audience, but participating, right? We just need that to be more equal as well, right? So that we're not just having a conversation amongst ourselves as women, but we're having a bigger conversation with others, with men. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I love that, and it echoes what you guys are saying. But I made a list. What useful support can we expect from the institutional level, And so I love that we're reflecting that it's not on us to change it, it's about systematic change. And one of the points is exactly what Ellen just said, which is spreading awareness about the implicit bias that we're not pretending that's gone. That's huge. So thank you to Amanda and everyone for organizing, because we're doing that. Clear paid maternity leave. Make sure that that's clear and that comes top down, and that helps women and that helps balance. Stopping tenure clock, things like that, being clear about policies that actually support us in the workplace is key. So I'm glad you brought that up, Julia. Thank you.
I think too, it's supporting men who want to take time and parental leave. Martin,
Yeah, so I'm Martin. I'm a librarian. Prior to working as a librarian, I worked for the Victorian Art Nurses, and before that, I was a music teacher. So I've always been in sort of female-dominated professions. And have been involved in meetings where I've expressed that, usually related to budgetary things, because teaching and librarians and nurses often kind of bear the brunt of budget cuts when they come, as they inevitably do. And in expressing that those are all feminized professions as they're expressed, and those budgetary things, my bringing that up in meetings has led to people then afterwards coming to me and saying, thank you for doing that, and because we saw then the other males in the room perk their heads up and possibly finally take that as a legitimate point, which to me is a discouraging thing to hear. The men in the female-dominated professions finally seeing that, yes, they're in a female-dominated profession, and that impacts how the entire profession is viewed and interacts. So just kind of echoing that.
We all need allies, right? My name is Linda. I'm an engineer. I worked my entire life in a professional role, often the expert in the room, but not being able to have my voice heard. I don't have a big voice anyway, it's kind of fun. But being in the room and having to repeat over and over again something to get heard, and eventually just having to wait for a man to say it, have it actually heard.
Right. Yes.
But I mean, that's it. You have to find that ally in the room that's going to back you and say, oh yeah, she's right, that's it. And sometimes it's another woman, but I mean, in my profession, mostly it's been that.
Right. Thank you. We'll take maybe one last, and then we'll get to the next pair. Colleen.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo your sentiment. I feel in teaching young people, I definitely teach around grade 8, 9, 10. So it's often an age where you start to see students interact really differently with each other based on gender. And that can be in how they're talking about each other when they're not together also. I found it incredibly frustrating because I was raised by like a super feminist mother who was like, I was sitting in the car while she was protesting. Like it was next level. So for me, I feel really passionate about these issues, but I also feel so frustrated about my lack of ability to access my male students and to help teach them how they can be allies, because they don't hear it from me. That's the reality. And it's so frustrating, but man, I'm working on my husband. He's also a teacher, and I've had really emotional conversations with him because it's so frustrating for me, but the reality is, like, I need you to care about this as much as I care about it, because you are the person who's going to be able to access these young boys and help them to be the best men they can possibly be and help make positive change in this area. And it's so frustrating that women's voices still aren't being heard in the same way. But at the same time, I also find it terrifying how there are now women coming up thinking that they don't need feminism and that everything's fine. I was terrified. I'm TA for first year education. And so I run seminars, and they have a whole lecture series on gender and sexuality. And when I came to that seminar, I think I felt overconfident to talk about this with them. And then I was just shocked and blindsided by how many of these really strong female students I had in first and second year that were saying, I don't really see this as a really big issue. I don't really know why we needed to talk about this. And I was just, I don't think I handled it well because I was just really shocked. But it made me really aware of how important it is to keep these conversations going and have events like this that highlight that this is still a prevalent issue. It's not all in the past.
Yeah, that's a great point, yeah. It's remarkable how you can come across it in the most unlikely places, which I think it's important to remind ourselves regularly that we need to be mindful of these challenges. Okay, let's move to the last panel pair. And Mary and Ellen, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So the first question, what are the most important relationships to build and cultivate? Be that mentors, peers, with men, women, networking, etc.
I would say there's 2 answers to that. The first one might sound corny, but it's with yourself. It has come up during the conversation over and over how important it is for you to talk to yourself, to be out there, to be brave. So that's certainly something that you have to be very mindful and cultivate your relationship with yourself, to see yourself as an asset and invest in yourself. You're investing time and resources on yourself. So that's one of the main ones that I think we want to be aware of. The second one, it's everyone. Because truly, you don't know where you're going to have that source of inspiration, that challenge that will push you to be a better self, a better professional. And that's where you don't want to leave anyone out. We want to be included. Why should we be leaving anyone out? Yes, there are certainly that people that you may not want to be around as much, but even from that people that challenge you, that hinder your way, you can learn from them, because then they give you that extra push, that stubbornness to, oh, women can do this? Let me show you. Hold my thing. And then, right? So it's all of those reasons. There's value in having that kind of people around.
Right.
And there was years ago that I had a student working for me, and as I was moving on, he approached me, and he was in high school back then. After working with you, I know what I want to be. I want to be an engineer because I've seen the work that you are doing. It's like, well, you know what? I never thought I would find so much inspiration from my students, but I did. And then that really became a big thing for me. Like, yeah, I will continue studying one master's, then another, but it was just, you never know where you'll find that inspiration.
That's great. And leading off, thanks, Mary. Like what you've said is very much what I was about. That you never know who you're going to be encountering, and I don't think there's one more important relationship than another with others, because if you start to exclude people or make judgments about who would be important, then you're not expanding the conversation. You're not being that diversity, and I think those relationships, whether we're the mentor or it's with our peers or men or women, it's that encompassing all people that you get the most strength from, and that we get the best solutions and answers for these questions of sustainability and just all questions, right? The key to me is that relationship piece, right? To building the relationships, even with the difficult people, as you said, like there are so much you learn from them. You learn from them, but I think other people around you also learn from them. So not that long ago, just a couple of years ago, we was in a series of meetings with some outside people, and after a couple of different meetings, just after being introduced, at the beginning of the meeting when we were, shaking hands and saying hello to each other, the one fellow automatically pulled me in, went to shake his hand and gave me a kiss, which you wouldn't kiss your male colleagues in that way, right? And the other men in the room were really horrified by this, and we had a conversation about it afterwards. And I think that awkward, unpleasant, event led to a discussion with the other people and built a different kind of relationship where then they were supportive, saw that kind of, abuse and sexism take place that they probably hadn't really noticed before or were aware of. So all kinds of opportunities lead to better relationships.
I agree entirely. And does anyone else want to add to that? Okay. The second question we have is, can you describe how having a gender balanced team can or has led to success in looking toward a sustainable future, and how it can help to achieve the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
I think it's a loaded question. With the SDGs, part of what I see as one of the challenges with them is that they give you these 17 goals, and they are 17. But they are really so intertwined to one another that it's so easy to just lose perspective of how much one influences the other, and how much, if you don't do that, then you're sacrificing 5 of the other goals. So it's quite a convoluted approach. But then you need to find, if you lose sight of that, you fall into a vicious circle. So on the opposite side, you need to create a virtuous circle to break that and to really get the momentum that we talked before going. And that's a gender balanced team, because that's a way that you can address gender equality, that you can address security, social justice. So there are so many things that can be addressed by that single input. And that input is one that has organizations and government has a little bit more control, because now it's more awareness, more education about it. So that's a great opportunity for inserting into that virtuous circle to get things rolling down. But again, without losing sight of everything that touches throughout the SDGs.
Okay. From my experience with I think there's a lot of success with the gender balance team in that, because of, as we've been talking consistently of that theme, the diversity of voices. Give an example through my working for a municipality, we were doing a zoning bylaw. So the zoning, if you're not aware, sort of regulates how land is used at a fairly detailed level, and in discussions with talking about how we wanted to restructure the zoning bylaw, this is for the city of St. Catharines, talking about employment, where employment should be allowed, and we came up with some requirements that would allow home-based businesses to actually hire people and have a staff member to sell goods, to really allow employment at a different scale than having to go out into a commercial space, which my colleagues on the team hadn't thought of before. Really help support women primarily who need to have opportunities to maybe start a small business, and allowing them to do that within their own home and bring in staff, and sales would allow them to have the balance, as they're still primarily the ones looking after the home and childcare. It gave opportunities where they wouldn't have thought of that before, and how important that scale of employment opportunity was important to the bigger welfare of the community. So without my voice, I really don't think, or if there were other women, that would have been something that would have been thought of. And I think, as you said, like those intertwined goals for sustainable development are really, in the planning world, that's a big part of what we look at, is always that how everything is like this. Everything is intertwined. You have to try to understand and reach those goals all together. You can't leave one thing out, and having the diverse opinions helps you get there.
Okay, is anyone on the panel want to? All right, well then I'll remind the audience, and Sarah, if you don't mind, maybe just letting those folks know they can come in and set up. That would be great, thank you. So just to remind everyone that the most important relationships to build and cultivate was the first question, and the second was then how having a gender balanced team can or has led us to success in looking toward a sustainable future, and how to help achieve the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So does anyone want to add to that from the audience? Yes.
My name is Dave Cano, principal at CAS Consulting. I'm a just small energy and sustainability consulting firm here in the Niagara region.
Great.
And I don't think there's any other way to solve the goals or achieve the goals for the sustainable development United Nations framework without a gender-based approach, because they basically come from an unbalanced and biased society. So all those, the issues that they're trying to tackle come from that imbalance between the gender approaches towards society. And if we don't have both sides of the table, so the people that are causing the issue and the people that are trying to solve them, we won't be able to reach any of those targets at all. And by having people at the table that are doing something by either action or inaction, because a lot of the times it's because people don't know they're doing something, that they don't know they're causing the issue, but by bringing them to the table and letting them know, well, this is what's happening and we need you to be aware of that, then you can help me and help yourself come to a solution.
Thank you, Dave. I agree entirely. I think that's really important. Anyone else want to add any? Okay, well, we have some closing questions that we can ask. We'll just do one, yeah. The first one. This is a great question that we'll open to the panelists and then to the floor. But I really like this because it's something that you can then maybe bring with you along with what you've learned thus far. And it's, what is the best piece of advice you ever received? Or what advice would you give a much younger version of yourself? Yeah.
I'll jump in. Go for it. Okay. I think that I did one thing right and I did one thing wrong. So if I was advising my young self, the thing I think I did right was, just as you brought up, the gender bias is alive and well, and often it's implicit. But we know, as Shay talked about, if you get two resumes on your desk and they're identical, all of us collectively will perceive the male as more qualified if the qualifications match. So as a female in the professional workplace, we've got to fight, and I think that's something I did well. I didn't assume I would be taken at face value. I assumed I would be undervalued. So fighting across everything, you've got to publish more, you've got to be earlier, you've got to dress more professionally, you've got to fight. And so that's a piece of advice that I would give myself, but I think I did, and I got my dream job, and I'm proud of that, and I've been fighting for it for 15 years. I said it, so that's one. The thing that I think I didn't get right is there are many models for success, and I thought I had to be like a man. We've all heard that, whatever that means. There's lots of different kinds of men, but you don't have to be a certain personality type or persona to be successful. You don't have to be self-promotional and aggressive and competitive. That is one model of success, but there are lots of different ones, and you can be humble, you can be an introvert, you can be however you are and still be very successful. So I think that is advice I would have given my old self, my younger self.
Well, I'll jump in too. So, I mean, I could talk about this all day, to be quite honest. And on that point, though, I think the biggest thing for me is self-reflection. I would tell my younger self that it's important to do and do it often and learn from it, right? And so, just because I did things well early in my career and things not so well early in my career. And so those not so well things I wish, I maybe would have been a bit more okay with myself on and learned versus, taking that kind of as sort of that, maybe taking a bit of my confidence away. So I would tell my younger self that. But I think if anything too, what I've learned along my path, and I'm finally in a career where I am working with people who share the same values as me. I work for a leader who stays core to their, so I would give my advice to me saying, find that earlier in your career. You know, we all have to start somewhere. Trust me, you got to get something on your resume. You have to build it up. You have to. But once you've done that, really find someone and people that share those values. They don't have to think the same as you, but share the same values, have the same goal. Because I tell you, going to work every day is a pleasure. I mean, Leanne kind of highlighted, I mean, I'm lucky to have a colleague like Leanne, but I have a lovely group of senior management that I'm really proud to work with. And, you know, interestingly enough, for a municipality, it's very odd. We actually have more women on our senior management team now than we do men. And in disciplines that traditionally men typically hold. So I'm really proud to be part of that group, but mostly because they're really smart, intelligent people and not necessarily because of their gender, but I think that's just a bonus. And so I would say those are sort of the same. So stay true to yourself, find, you know, those that share the same values, do a lot of self-reflection, and, you know, so that's the work side of me. My personal side is I very much believe that we have to give back to our community. So find somewhere where you can give back. I think we all have a responsibility to do that. So whether it's in your passion, an area of interest that you have, or for me, it's really about community leadership. So, you know, I sit on the board of Niagara Community Foundation, and it's been one of my biggest accomplishments and probably one of the things I'm most proud of in my entire life. So, you know, I'm surrounded by people who really want to make a difference in Niagara and give back to charities. So I would say also on the personal side, give back. It's really important.
Okay, I'll go next. Sure.
It's not really good at
yeah.
Well, no, you have to.
No. Well, and I think, you know, the self-reflection is something that I was also thinking about in this question. But I'll talk about something else. Well, related. And it's related to everything that's been talked about for the last hour and 50 minutes. And that's try to connect with others that are in a similar situation to you. So part of that is knowing what your situation is and being self-aware. Something that I'd say I didn't do so well early on. Once you know what your situation is, you can find those resources. And I think we're in a really great time in our lives in that way, in that technology connects us so easily to each other, and we can find communities of people that are going through the same thing as us. So there's huge support systems out there online for students at varying stages of their career, academic, life, I think it's called. Yeah, I came across it on Twitter too. I was like, this is amazing. No matter for postdocs and thinking about, am I ever going to actually get a faculty job? There's all these supports out there, finding people who are in a similar situation to you as a source of positive support, not as a source of, complaining and just kind of getting down on your own situation, but finding those resources that are supportive, and you can be a support to others. And I think that's really mutually enforcing, and you can be a force for good, even if you're feeling like you're in a situation that's not optimal. So that would be my advice to my younger self.
I'm going to go, but I'm going to keep it really short because I think I've already touched on this. But to my younger self, I would just say to be you bravely and to be confident, because I think that's something that I struggled with early on, and I've really just come to grow into it, I suppose, over the last couple of years. But and to all of you as well, just be you and know that you can get to where you want as long as you work hard.
For me, someone really, really smart told me years ago that the only constant is change, and that I should be concerned about how acceleration, so how fast that change is happening or not. It took me years to understand, but it's something that I would go back and tell myself, just understanding that from the beginning about change is happening with sustainability, with gender equality, change is happening. So we have to wonder, is it happening fast enough? Is it not happening fast enough? And then what can we do or we want to do to accelerate that? Because both are on the same situation where change has to happen. How can we make that change happen? Is it happening fast enough? And it's something that I think if I had realized earlier in my career, probably I would have my PhD by now, but I'm still not there. So it's one of those things that you have to really absorb so that you understand things are like this right now, but it won't always be like this. And what can I do as a woman, as a professional, to make that change happen?
My advice would be to myself as a younger person would be to get my voice earlier, to speak up, to not think that because I was a woman or because I was young, that I didn't have something important to say. That I did. And it took me a little while to figure that out.
Okay, well, I'll add, there's, I guess, two bits. The first is that I love that I'm now in a position where, yeah, I could say a lot to my younger self, but midway through my career, I've seen how others have actually tried to help me along and maybe hurt me in the process, right? So by putting me, or requiring that a woman sit on a hiring committee, for example, that would be a great idea. But then if you're one of two females in a department, then maybe that's taxing the individual a little too much. So being aware of how I can play an important role in that not happening to younger faculty, for example, I think is really important. But the other, I love the be yourself. And someone reminded me once that, everybody else is taken. So, and then we're at Brock University at the BU, which is, I know. The talk that I heard at Brock, it's very kind of ironic. But the other piece I think that's really important that I personally, and it's very painful for myself because this self-reflection piece, but I always try to make myself uncomfortable. Change only comes from discomfort, so I love that. So I do things that make me uncomfortable, but make perhaps me a good role model for students. So I go and push myself to do things like present at the committee of the whole for the town of Lincoln with the mayor, the CAO. That was a really, really different experience for me to Lincoln Living Lab, and quite uncomfortable, sitting, you're surrounded by everyone and it's recorded and all of that. So I think an important piece too is to, and Ryan and I once had a guest speaker a few years ago, Heather Stewart, a friend of mine, who's at Dillon Consulting, an environmental consulting firm, and she reminded me of the book about leaning in, right, and leaning into the conversation and sitting in the room where maybe you don't feel entirely comfortable, but it puts you in a position where you're at the table and you can make a contribution. So I guess my bit would be, if it feels uncomfortable, that's okay, and you can still operate from that space and be successful. So I just want to thank the panel. That was a fantastic talk. I think being in balance really puts us in a position of strength to address all these challenges that we face in sustainability and even beyond that, right? So I really like all of the messages we heard today, the education piece, the starting from very young age to recognizing diversity and different lived experiences just here in this room was remarkable. So I want to just thank everybody for engaging and interacting and making my position here as moderator quite pleasant and enjoyable, despite a little discomfort, I must say. That was great. So thank you. I'll pass the floor now over to Amanda.
I'm going to echo Marilyne's thanks. First of all, to the audience, thank you for coming and participating. To our two RAs, Connor and Meredith, who helped put the event together. And honestly, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to the panelists and the moderator. This event wouldn't have been possible without all of you, and I really, truly appreciate it, and I'm sure everyone else does as well. We're going to have lunch now, so I hope that most of you can stick around. And please feel free to interact with the panelists, with each other, because I think we only learn when we actually speak to one another. I work with Julia every day, and I actually had no idea if we were both first-generation students. So it's interesting when you don't talk about these things and what they can do and bond you together when you know other people have been through the same experiences. So thank you. Enjoy.